the melody of grace. The crystal glass shattered before anyone knew what had happened. Champagne sprayed across the white linen table like a burst of gold rain, and every head in the dining room turned toward the corner where Mr. Douglas Harlow was standing, red-faced and furious. "You call this service?" he barked, slamming the broken stem onto the table. The sound echoed like a pistol shot across the elegant hall of the Savannah Ridge Country Club. Waiters froze mid-step, and soft jazz from the live band faded awkwardly as the tension thickened. The air smelled of perfume, money, and fear. Grace Miller, standing 3 tables away with a tray balanced on her palm, caught the fragments of his anger like shards of glass to the chest. She had seen men like him before, rich, bored, and too used to seeing people like her bow their heads and apologize for things they didn't do. The pale shimmer of the piano near the stage caught her eye, its polished surface glowing under the chandelier. Funny, she thought, how the instrument that had once felt like home now sat like a trophy for people who didn't understand music, only ownership. Harlow snapped his fingers, calling her over. "You," he said sharply, pointing with the cold precision of a man who believed the world bent at his will. "The quiet one. Come here," his friends chuckled, 3 men in tuxedos. 2 women in diamond bracelets, the kind who laughed not because something was funny, but because it was expected. Grace approached, calm but wary. "Yes, sir?" "You were humming something," he said, tilting his head. "What was that?" "Sounded fancy. Beethoven, Chopin? Something you learned from YouTube?" His words were dipped in poison disguised as humor. A few guests smirked. One of the women muttered, "How adorable." Grace felt the heat rise in her throat. "Just a tune," she said quietly, her voice steady but low. Harlow leaned back, swirling the last of his champagne. "A tune, huh? Well, let's hear it then. Play it. That piano's been collecting dust all night." The words hit her like a slap. The entire table turned toward her, grinning in anticipation of the spectacle. She realized then this wasn't a request. It was entertainment. She was the evening's joke. A flicker of something dark passed through her eyes. Not fear, not shame, but memory. The last time she had played piano, her mother was still alive, her hands resting on Grace's shoulders as she whispered, "Don't ever let them silence what's inside you, baby." She hadn't touched a piano since the hospital bills drowned her dream and forced her to trade music for minimum wage and exhaustion. "I'm just here to serve, sir," she replied, setting the tray down gently. "Then serve us some music," Harlow sneered, his grin widening as the crowd chuckled. "Come on, sweetheart. Show us what talent looks like when it wears an apron." Laughter rippled across the table like static. The band had gone silent. Even the chandeliers seemed to hum with unease. Grace's heart thudded not from fear but from something older, the taste of humiliation she'd swallowed too many times. She looked around. The manager stood near the bar, helpless, his eyes pleading with her to just go along with it. But Grace didn't move. For a moment, time seemed to fold in on itself. Her mother's face, the broken piano in their old church, the echo of a childhood dream crushed under bills and pity. Then slowly she set her tray aside, untied her apron, and walked toward the piano. The click of her shoes against the marble floor cut through the whispers like the ticking of a clock, counting down to something inevitable. Harlow laughed. "Now that's the spirit. Let's see if the help can play Chopin." Grace didn't answer. She sat down at the piano bench, the polished keys reflecting her face, calm, resolute, and unreadable. Her fingers hovered above the keys. For an instant she hesitated. The room felt like a cage, the audience a pack of wolves waiting for the first mistake. Then she exhaled. One soft, trembling note filled the silence. It was fragile at first, like the breath of a memory trying to return to life. Then another note followed, and another, building into a melody that shimmered like light breaking through storm clouds. The laughter died. Glasses were lowered. Even Harlow froze, his grin slipping as the air thickened with something sacred. Grace played not for them, but for every humiliation she had endured, every dream she had buried. Every night she had cried quietly behind a locked door. By the time the final note faded, the room felt haunted. Not by ghosts, but by the truth that money could never buy what she had just given them. And as Grace rose from the piano, the silence that followed was louder than applause. The mockery turns into defiance. The silence that hung after Grace's final note was the kind that made people uncomfortable, the kind that stripped away the polite layers of wealth and arrogance and left something raw underneath. For several seconds, no one moved. No glass clinked. No voice dared to break the spell. Grace stood, eyes steady, hands trembling only slightly as the weight of what she'd done sank in. Then, like a crack in the surface of ice, Mr. Douglas Harlow laughed. It was a slow, mocking sound that echoed across the room, slicing through the fragile reverence that had begun to take hold. "Well," he said, clapping once, twice, deliberately. "Looks like the help has hidden talents after all." His tone was light, but his eyes burned with something colder, humiliation dressed as humor. The crowd followed his lead, clapping awkwardly, some smiling, some unsure whether it was praise or cruelty. Grace didn't smile. She didn't bow. She turned toward the piano again, brushing her fingertips along the keys as if to comfort them, then faced Harlow. "Was that enough, sir?" she asked quietly, her voice steady but carrying through the room like a clean blade. The question cut deeper than he expected. "Enough?" he repeated, raising a brow. "Oh no, sweetheart, we're just getting started." He leaned back in his chair, arrogance returning like armor. "Play something fun now, something we know. Maybe a little Ray Charles? Something we can clap to." His friends laughed again, relieved to see the moment tilt back toward cruelty. "Oh yes, make it lively," one woman giggled, her diamond earrings catching the light. "You've got rhythm in you, don't you?" Grace's jaw tightened. Around them, the club's manager started to step forward, but Harlow raised a hand. "Relax, she's fine," he said. "Aren't you, darling? We're just having a little fun." Fun. That word had been used to excuse too many cruelties in Grace's life. She could feel the humiliation simmering inside her, but beneath it, something else began to rise. Not rage, not pride, something sharper, more deliberate. "All right," she said softly, turning back to the piano. The crowd murmured, curious. Grace's fingers hovered again, but this time the notes came faster, sharper. A different melody altogether. It wasn't Ray Charles. It wasn't jazz or blues or anything the rich crowd expected. It was dark, haunting, and unrelenting, a storm of sound that refused to be tamed. The rhythm pulsed with defiance, every note striking like lightning against marble walls. The laughter died again. People exchanged glances. One man muttered, "What is this?" But Grace didn't hear them. She was somewhere else now, back in her mother's old house where the piano keys had been chipped and yellowed, and yet every sound was a heartbeat. She played for the little girl she used to be, the one who believed music could lift her out of anything. Harlow's smirk faltered. There was something unsettling in her music, something that didn't belong in a country club dining hall. It was too honest, too alive. He shifted in his seat, trying to disguise his unease. But the melody wrapped around him like smoke, forcing him to feel things he had buried long ago. When Grace finally stopped, the silence returned, heavier this time. Her breathing was uneven, her eyes distant as if she'd just walked through fire. "That wasn't exactly upbeat," Harlow said after a pause, forcing a grin. "I said play something fun, not—" Whatever that was, Grace looked at him. "It wasn't meant to be fun," she said simply. A low murmur spread through the guests again, some uneasy, some enthralled. There was something different in her now, something that demanded respect even from those too proud to give it. Harlow rose slowly from his chair, his pride prickling under the weight of her calm. "You're quite the performer," he said, voice tight. "You almost made us believe you belong up there." Grace didn't flinch. "I didn't play to belong," she said. "I played because you asked." The manager finally approached, whispering urgently, "Mr. Harlow, please, let's not turn this into something." "Into what?" Harlow snapped. "She's an employee. I'm a paying guest. I asked her to play and she played. We're all having a lovely time, aren't we?" The lie hung heavy in the air. One of Harlow's friends, a quieter man with graying hair, leaned forward. "Doug," he said softly, "maybe it's enough." But Harlow's pride was already bleeding. He couldn't stop now. "No," he said coldly. "If she's so talented, maybe she should audition for something real. I hear they're always looking for background music at funerals." The words landed like a slap. Gasps rippled through the room. Even his own friends fell silent. Grace didn't move. Her expression didn't crack. She simply turned, walked back to the piano and pressed one final chord, low, deep, and resonant. It filled the hall like a judgment, vibrating through the marble floors until it felt like the whole room was holding its breath. Then she stood, smoothed her uniform, and met his gaze. "You'll remember that sound long after you forget my face," she said, and she walked away, leaving behind a silence that no one dared to break. As she disappeared through the kitchen doors, Harlow's laughter faltered into a nervous chuckle. But inside, something in him had already begun to unravel. The first crack in the armor had formed, and though he didn't know it yet, the melody she left behind would haunt him far longer than his pride ever could. The transformation of the room. Music awakens memory and humanity. The sound of that last chord refused to fade. It lingered long after Grace disappeared into the kitchen, curling through the chandeliers and down the velvet drapes like invisible smoke. For a long moment no one dared to speak. The rich guest who had come to drink and gossip over caviar now sat in a silence that felt like shame. The piano still vibrated faintly, a pulse left behind by something too real for that room. Douglas Harlow broke the silence first, with a nervous laugh that sounded too loud, too forced. "Well," he said, brushing imaginary lint off his sleeve, "seems our entertainment tonight is a bit dramatic." But his words fell flat. The crowd didn't laugh this time. The woman with the diamond earrings lowered her eyes. One of the men quietly adjusted his tie. Something had shifted and everyone felt it, though none of them could name it. Harlow reached for his champagne only to find his hand trembling. It annoyed him. He wasn't a man who trembled, but somehow that music had stirred something in him he didn't want to recognize. Something buried too deep or perhaps buried on purpose. He pushed the glass away and turned toward the piano, glaring at it like it had betrayed him. "Sir," the manager said quietly, stepping closer, "perhaps we should end the evening early." Harlow didn't answer. He stood up abruptly, ignoring the stares that followed, and walked toward the piano. The keys glimmered faintly in the dim light, still warm from Grace's touch. He ran a finger over them, and felt an ache he didn't expect. A memory slid into place without permission. A woman's hands, graceful and pale, moving across the keys in the same rhythm. His mother's voice, soft and southern, whispering, "Douglas, baby, slow down. Feel the notes, don't fight them." For a moment he was a boy again, sitting beside her as she played hymns in their small Savannah home before it all fell apart, before the divorce, before she drank herself into silence, before he built his fortune out of anger and loss. He pulled his hand away like it had burned him. "Sir?" the manager asked again. "I'm fine," Harlow muttered, but his voice sounded wrong, hoarse, almost fragile. Behind the kitchen doors, Grace leaned against the counter, trying to steady her breath. Her coworkers hovered nearby, whispering, "Girl, you crazy?" One of them whispered, "You could lose your job." Grace smiled faintly, but her eyes glistened. "Maybe," she said, "but at least I didn't lose myself." Out in the dining room, people began gathering their coats, uneasy. The laughter and arrogance that had filled the night had curdled into something else. A woman murmured, "That music. It felt like a funeral." Another said softly, "It felt like confession." Douglas Harlow stood alone by the piano, ignoring the murmurs. He sat down, his body stiff, and pressed a key. The note rang out low and hollow. He tried another, then another. The sound was wrong, lifeless, disconnected. No warmth, no meaning, just noise. He slammed the lid shut. As he stood, he caught sight of something tucked under the piano bench, a small piece of paper. Curious, he bent down and pulled it out. It was a folded napkin written in a neat, looping hand. Music can tell truths that power can't. No name, no signature, just that. He stared at it for a long time, his pulse quickening, for the first time in years. Harlow felt something unfamiliar creeping into his chest. Not anger, not pride, but guilt. Not the shallow guilt of bad manners, but the kind that stings in places you thought were dead. He crumpled the note and shoved it into his pocket. The other guests began leaving quietly, offering awkward smiles as they passed. One of his friends, Tom Whitaker, the silver-haired one who had tried to stop him earlier, lingered by the door. "Doug," he said softly, "you should have stopped when you had the chance." Harlow didn't look up. "She's just a waitress," Tom hesitated. "Maybe." but she played like someone who's lived more life than you ever will. Then he left, leaving Harlow alone with the echo of truth ringing in his ears. Outside, rain had begun to fall, slow, deliberate drops that tapped against the tall windows like a metronome. Harlow watched the storm gather, his reflection blurred in the glass. Somewhere in the distance, faintly, he thought he heard that melody again, the one she'd played. It rose and fell with the rhythm of the rain until it became impossible to tell if it was real or imagined. He turned toward the kitchen doors, but Grace was gone. Hours later, his driver pulled the limousine up to the grand iron gates of his estate. Inside his mansion, the silence was suffocating. The rooms were vast, sterile, filled with expensive things that didn't mean anything. In the corner of his study sat a piano covered in dust. He hadn't touched it in over 20 years. He stood there, staring at it, the napkin still in his pocket. Then, without quite knowing why, Douglas Harlow sat down, lifted the lid, and pressed a key. The sound was brittle, uneven. He tried another and another until something faint began to emerge, a broken echo of what Grace had played. But the harder he tried, the emptier it felt. Finally, he stopped, his hands trembling over the keys. A single tear slipped down his cheek before he could stop it. He didn't understand why he was crying. All he knew was that the woman he had mocked had reached into a part of him no amount of money or power could touch. And somewhere deep inside, a small, dangerous thought began to form, a thought that scared him more than any failure ever had. What if the person I humiliated tonight is the only one who still knows what it means to be human? The aftermath, shame and reflection. By morning, the rain had not stopped. It fell in relentless sheets across the manicured lawns of Douglas Harlow's estate, washing the world in gray. Inside, the silence felt heavier than the storm. Harlow hadn't slept. His eyes were sunken, the crystal tumbler beside him empty, the piano lid still half open like an accusation. He had spent the night trying to replay the melody she'd played, but every time his fingers touched the keys, the sound collapsed, flat, soulless. Wrong. He kept hearing her voice in his head. You'll remember that sound long after you forget my face. He thought he could drink it away, but the melody returned between every sip, slow, haunting, deliberate. It was no longer just a song. It was something alive, breathing in the corners of his mind. He walked across his grand parlor, passing portraits of himself and his father, the man who had built the Harlow fortune on oil and arrogance. For the first time, those faces looked unfamiliar, like ghosts watching him unravel. By noon, he drove to the club, demanding to speak to the manager. The staff avoided his eyes. The night before had already spread like wildfire through town. The night the rich man mocked the waitress who humbled him with a piano. It was all anyone could talk about. The manager greeted him with an uneasy smile. She quit, he said before Harlow could ask. What? Grace Miller. She handed in her apron this morning. Said she was done working here. Where did she go? The manager hesitated. She mentioned her mother wasn't well. Said she needed to take care of things back home. Somewhere near Riverbend. Harlow said nothing. He left the club, his face pale and tight, and drove aimlessly through the city. The rain followed him like guilt that refused to wash away. He ended up parking near an old church, the kind with broken windows and a sagging roof. From inside, faint music drifted out. He followed it like a moth to flame. A small choir was rehearsing, their voices soft and imperfect. But the piano underneath caught his ear. It had that same fragile depth, that same rhythm. He stepped inside quietly, hat in hand, the scent of rain and dust mixing with candle wax. At the piano sat a thin, tired-looking woman with streaks of gray in her hair. Not grace, but the same posture, the same tenderness in the way she touched the keys. The choir stopped when they saw him. Can I help you, sir? The woman asked. He hesitated, then said, I'm looking for Grace Miller. The woman smiled faintly. My daughter. She's not here. She's with her mother at the clinic. Who's asking? My name's Douglas Harlow. He waited for the flash of recognition, the disgust. But the woman only nodded, her eyes soft but unreadable. She told me about you, the woman said finally. Said you reminded her of the men who laughed when she played at the church as a girl. But she also said she saw something else in you, something broken. Harlow swallowed hard. I came to apologize. Then don't tell me, the woman said gently. Tell her. Before he could answer, a deep cough echoed from the back of the church. Another woman, older, frail, wrapped in a shawl, was being helped in by a nurse. Her face was drawn, her breathing shallow. The mother. She won't be here long, the pianist murmured softly. Grace has been working herself to death trying to keep her alive. Something inside Harlow cracked open at those words. He felt a sting of recognition, because once, long ago, he'd done the same. For his own mother. Until his father made him choose between money and mercy. He'd chosen wrong, and he'd been running from it ever since. He thanked the woman and left, driving straight to the Riverbend clinic. When he arrived, Grace was there, sitting beside her mother's bed. The room was small, the wallpaper peeling, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant and old grief. She looked up when he entered, surprise flickering across her face, then hardening into guarded calm. You shouldn't be here, she said. I came to apologize? She interrupted. You already did, every time you tried to play that piano last night. You just didn't know it. He opened his mouth, but no words came. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a check, blank, signed, ready. For her treatment, he said quietly, please, let me do this. Grace looked at the paper, then back at him. You think this makes it right? No, he said. It just makes it a little less wrong. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she tore the check neatly in half, the sound slicing through the room. You can't buy back respect, she said. You earn it. Her mother stirred weakly, whispering something that neither of them caught. Grace leaned closer, tears brimming. It's all right, Mama, she murmured. I'm here. Harlow turned to leave, but her mother's voice stopped him. Douglas. He froze. She said his name like she had known it for years. When he turned, her tired eyes met his. You look just like your mama when she used to play. The world tilted. You knew my mother? The old woman smiled faintly. Knew her? Baby, I used to sing with her. Church choir in Savannah. She said you had music in you, but the world was trying to buy it out of you. Grace's head turned sharply toward her mother. Mama, what are you saying? But the old woman only closed her eyes, whispering, Some debts ain't paid in money, child. They're paid in what we give back, and then she fell silent. The monitor beeped softly beside her bed. Grace grabbed her mother's hand, crying quietly. Harlow stood frozen, unable to move, the truth unraveling inside him like a storm. His cruelty, her music, their shared past, all tangled together by the echo of two mothers who had once played the same hymns. Outside, thunder cracked and lightning lit up the small window, revealing both of their reflections side by side. Two people broken by the same song, bound now by something neither had expected. Forgiveness that neither of them was ready for. But somewhere deep inside, both knew. This was only the beginning. Redemption and confrontation. The thunderstorm that had rolled over Riverbend that night seemed unwilling to leave. It growled above the small clinic as if echoing the chaos inside. Grace sat by her mother's bedside long after the monitors had gone silent, her hands clasped tightly around the ones that would never warm again. The room had emptied, nurses gone, lights dimmed, but Douglas Harlow remained, standing in the doorway like a man who didn't know whether he had a right to breathe the same air. He had seen death before, but not like this, not clean and corporate like his father's, but human, intimate, stripped of dignity yet filled with grace. Watching her mother fade had taken something from Grace, yet it had also hardened something else within her, a quiet determination that this would not be the end of her story. When she finally rose, her face was wet, but her spine straight. You should go, she said softly without looking at him. I can't, he whispered. Grace turned, her eyes swollen but fierce. You can't fix this. You don't belong here. He stepped closer, voice trembling. I know, but I can't walk away from what I did. I can't unsee the way she looked at me, as if I'd already been judged and found guilty. She knew me before I even said a word. Grace looked at him for a long, unreadable moment. My mother saw things other people missed, she said. Pain recognizes pain. They stood in silence, the rain tapping against the window like an old rhythm neither wanted to hear. Then Harlow reached into his coat and handed her a small velvet box. I was going to give this to you last night, he said. Grace frowned, opening it. Inside was a tiny gold pin in the shape of a treble clef. What is this? My mother's, he said. She wore it every Sunday when she played at the church. She used to say that music was a kind of prayer even for those who didn't believe. His voice cracked. I haven't touched a piano since she died. Until last night. Grace looked down at the pin, her expression softening, though her guard remained. Why give this to me? Because when you played, he said, I heard her again, and I hated you for it, because you reminded me of what I lost and what I became. Her breath caught, her anger tangled with something heavier, pity maybe, or understanding she didn't want to feel. You think a single act of guilt can wash away a lifetime of arrogance? She said, her voice trembling. You humiliated me in front of a room full of strangers just to feel powerful. And now you stand here talking about redemption like it's a song you can replay until it sounds right. Harlow didn't argue. He just nodded. Maybe that's true, but I'm still here. Grace stared at him. For the first time, he looked small, not because of his height or wealth, but because he finally saw the limits of both. Why? She asked quietly. Why are you really here? He hesitated, then spoke the truth he hadn't even admitted to himself. Because that night when you played, I felt something I haven't felt in 30 years, shame and hope. I didn't know a person could feel both at once. Tears slipped down Grace's cheeks, silent but unstoppable. My mother used to tell me, she said, that forgiveness isn't for the other person. It's what keeps you from becoming them. She walked to the piano in the corner of the clinic waiting room, the same one she had played for her mother during her final days, and sat down. Her fingers trembled as they touched the keys. This is the last song I played for her, she said quietly. She said it would be the one to heal the heart that listens. The first notes were fragile, uncertain, then grew stronger, shimmering through the room like the echo of rain on glass. Harlow closed his eyes. The melody was different this time, less sorrow, more peace. And within it he heard his own mother's voice whispering through memory. Don't fight the music, Douglas. Feel it. By the time Grace finished, tears streaked both their faces. She looked at him again, her voice low. If you really mean to change, don't do it for me. Don't even do it for yourself. Do it for the next person you'd have laughed at. He nodded, his throat too tight for words. As she stood, he said softly, Let me help, not with money. With something real. Grace tilted her head, wary. And what would that be? He looked around the small clinic, the peeling walls, the rusted piano, the nurses exhausted and underpaid. Then back at her. Music saved me once. Maybe it can save others too. That night he made a call to his lawyer, to his foundation, to anyone who still owed him a favor. Within weeks, plans began forming for a community arts program in Riverbend. Free instruments, lessons, and workshops for kids who had never touched a piano in their lives. Grace didn't believe it at first. People like Harlow didn't change. They only shifted their masks. But as weeks turned into months, she saw the impossible happening. One evening, as she walked past the same church where her mother used to sing, she heard laughter spilling out from inside. Children playing scales, small hands stumbling over keys. The old piano had been restored, its sound warm again. She stood by the door, unseen, listening. Then she turned and saw him, Douglas Harlow, standing at the back, quietly watching. No suit, no arrogance, no audience. Just a man listening to music he could never control again. For a moment their eyes met across the distance. Neither smiled, neither spoke. But something passed between them, acknowledgement. Perhaps even peace. Then Grace walked away into the night, the faint glow of streetlights catching the gold treble clef pin on her coat, the one she'd returned once, only for him to send back again with a note that simply said, Keep it. It belongs to music now. And though neither of them knew it yet, the melody that had begun in cruelty was about to become something far greater, a rebirth neither of them could have imagined, because forgiveness, like music, always finds its way home. The ending, transformation, and peace. The years that followed turned the story of that night at the Savannah Ridge Country Club into a quiet legend, one whispered in charity halls and church basements, in classrooms where pianos were missing keys but not hope. No one remembered the fine wine or the designer gowns from that evening anymore. What they remembered was the waitress who played the piano so fiercely that she silenced a room of power, and the man who left that room forever changed.